The train pulled away in a scream of iron and smoke, leaving her standing alone on the platform with a carpetbag clutched to her chest and fear stitched into every breath she took. Eleanor Whitmore had crossed half the country on nothing but hope and ink, letters written by a rancher named Thomas Hale, letters that promised protection, partnership, and a new beginning far from the hunger and cruelty she had known back east. But hope felt thin now. The station in Dry Creek was nearly empty, wind dragging dust across the wooden boards like restless spirits. She searched the small crowd for a tall man with kind eyes and a dark hat, the man who had signed his letters, "Yours with honor." Instead, she saw whispers, stares. A group of men leaned against a post outside the saloon, eyes slow and assessing. Her heart pounded harder when one of them smirked. She checked the folded letter again. "I'll meet you by the noon train." It was past noon. The sun hung merciless above her, and with every passing minute, the weight of being alone in a strange land pressed heavier against her ribs. When the first shove came, it happened so fast she barely registered it. Her carpetbag fell, its contents spilling into dust: 2 dresses, a Bible, a photograph of her younger self before life had hardened her gaze. Lauder followed, rough hands, the smell of whiskey, mail order bride. "Ha!" One of the men sneered, grabbing her wrist. She tried to pull away, but the second blow knocked the breath from her lungs. The world tilted sideways. Pain bloomed sharp along her cheekbone as she hit the wooden platform. No one stepped forward. No one interfered. Dry Creek had grown used to looking away. Boots circled her like vultures. She tasted blood. She thought of the letters again, of words like respect and safety. Maybe she had been foolish to believe ink could change a woman's fate. A kick struck her ribs. Another. The sky above blurred into white. "I said that's enough." The voice cut through the chaos like a rifle shot. Deep, controlled, dangerous. The boots stopped moving. Silence fell heavy and uncertain. Eleanor barely managed to lift her head before another body moved between her and the men. Tall, broad-shouldered, hat casting shadow over hard features. The air shifted. "You got a problem." "Hale?" One of the attackers spat. "So this was him, Thomas Hale. Not soft-eyed like she imagined." His jaw was set like carved stone. "Yeah." He answered quietly. "I do." There was no shouting, no wild threat, just certainty. The kind of certainty that made men reconsider their chances. A moment stretched thin. Then the men backed away, muttering curses. Thomas didn't look at them again. He knelt instead, carefully, gently. His rough hand hovered before touching her shoulder, as if afraid she might break beneath his fingers. "Miss Whitmore." His voice changed, lower, almost shaken. She tried to speak but coughed instead. He saw the blood at her lip, the swelling already rising along her face. Something dark flickered behind his eyes. "I'm sorry I was late," he said, voice thick with guilt. Then, more firmly as he lifted her into his arms, "I won't leave you." She woke to the smell of pinewood and clean linen, not whiskey and dust. For a long moment she didn't know where she was. Pain returned slowly, like a tide creeping over sand. Her ribs ached, her face throbbed. But the bed beneath her was soft. A basin of water rested nearby. A lamp burned low. And in a wooden chair beside the bed, elbows on knees, sat Thomas Hale. He hadn't slept. She could tell by the shadows beneath his eyes. When he noticed her stirring, he stood immediately. "Easy," he murmured. He didn't touch her at first. Didn't presume. "You're safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign. She tried to sit up and winced. He stepped forward then, one careful hand steadying her back. His touch was warm but restrained, like he feared frightening her. "They won't come near you again," he said, and the quiet steel in his tone made her believe him. Over the next days, Eleanor learned the rhythm of the ranch from her window, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of barn doors, the steady footfalls of a man who carried more than just responsibility on his shoulders. Thomas spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He apologized again for being late, explaining a broken fence line miles north that had delayed him. "That's no excuse," he said flatly. "You should have never been alone." She studied him when he wasn't looking. His hands were scarred. His knuckles bore fresh bruises, evidence of the fight he hadn't mentioned. He had stood between her and humiliation without hesitation. Why? She was a stranger bound to him only by arrangement. "Why did you answer my letter?" she asked one evening, her voice still fragile. He paused, considering. "Because I meant what I wrote. A home ought to be a place where no one raises a hand to you." The simplicity of it nearly broke her. But healing is never only of the body. Nightmares came. She would wake gasping, convinced she was still on that platform. Each time she found him nearby, sometimes on the porch, sometimes by the dying embers of the hearth. He never hovered, never crowded her space. Yet somehow he was always close enough that she didn't feel alone in the dark. One night, When thunder rolled across the plains and memory pressed too hard against her lungs, she stepped onto the porch where he sat. "They could have killed me," she whispered. He didn't deny it. Instead, he removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, as though steadying himself. "They won't touch you again," he repeated. She looked at him then, not at the cowboy, not at the stranger from letters, but at the man who had carried her like something precious. "Why?" she asked again, softer this time. His answer was simple, unadorned, and absolute. "Because I won't leave you." Word traveled fast in Dry Creek. Some called Thomas a fool for bringing a beaten bride into his home. Others muttered that a woman who arrived in trouble would only bring more of it. But Thomas did not bend under gossip. He rode into town with Eleanor beside him 1 week later. Her bruises faded to pale shadows, her spine straighter than before. Heads turned. The same men who had laughed now avoided his gaze. Thomas dismounted first, offering his hand, not as ownership, but as partnership. She took it. Her fingers trembled, but she did not hide. This time she would not be the girl left on the platform. Confrontation came swiftly. One of the men, emboldened by drink and wounded pride, stepped forward outside the general store. "Should have left her where she belongs," he jeered. The air tightened. Eleanor felt the old fear stir, but something stronger rose with it. Before Thomas could speak, she did. "Where I belong," she said clearly. "Somewhere I am not beaten for standing alone." Her voice carried across the street. Silence followed. Thomas didn't interrupt, didn't overshadow. He stood at her side, a steady presence, not a shield blocking her view but a wall at her back. When the man spat near her boots, Thomas moved then, not with fury, but with finality.
"You'll apologize,"
he said quietly. Something in his tone left no room for refusal, and slowly, grudgingly, the man did. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, Eleanor stood outside the ranch house and breathed in the scent of open land. This place had begun with violence, but it would not end that way. Thomas joined her, boots soft against dirt. "You don't owe me anything," he said after a while. "If you want to leave, I'll see you safely wherever you choose." She looked at him, at the man who had never once demanded gratitude, never claimed ownership over her survival. "I don't want to leave," she answered. The wind stirred her hair. His eyes searched hers, as if ensuring the choice was truly hers to make. She stepped closer, not out of dependence but out of trust. "You kept your promise," she said quietly. He frowned slightly. "What promise?" She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his scarred ones. "You didn't leave me." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he drew her gently into his arms, not possessive, not desperate, just certain. On the wide, unforgiving plains where cruelty had once nearly claimed her, mercy had taken root instead. And this time she was not alone. Peace, Eleanor learned, was fragile, especially for those who had survived cruelty. The days on the ranch settled into a rhythm gentle enough to feel unreal at times. Morning light spilled across the plains like a promise, and Eleanor found herself slowly reclaiming pieces of who she used to be before hunger and fear had taught her to stay small. She helped in the kitchen, learned the names of the horses, laughed quietly at Thomas's rare dry humor. Yet beneath the calm, something restless stirred. Thomas rode the perimeter more often now, eyes always scanning the horizon. He never spoke of it, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand hovered closer to his gun belt when strangers passed near the land. One evening, as the sun bled red into the earth, a distant rider appeared, too fast, too urgent. The message he carried was short and heavy. The men from Dry Creek hadn't forgotten. Pride wounded deeper than fists, and resentment had fermented into something dangerous. Fear tried to take root again, creeping into Eleanor's chest like a familiar shadow. But this time it didn't own her. "They'll come here?" she asked quietly as Thomas read the note again, jaw tightening. He folded the paper with care, as though refusing to let panic wrinkle it. "Maybe," he said, "but not without finding me standing in their way." His calm steadiness didn't erase her fear, but it transformed it. She wasn't the woman left bleeding on a platform anymore. She was someone who had survived. That night, Thomas showed her where he kept the rifle and how to use it. Not because he expected her to fight, but because he believed in her right to choose.
"Only if you want,"
he said. She took the rifle anyway, not to become violent but to never again be helpless. The confrontation came under a moonless sky. Hooves thundered like distant war drums, and lantern light flickered at the edge of the land. Eleanor stood on the porch beside Thomas, heart pounding, but her feet did not move. The men shouted insults, accusations, demands. Thomas stepped forward, voice calm but unwavering. "You leave now," he said, "or you answer to the law and to me." The standoff stretched thin, tension sharp enough to cut. Then Eleanor spoke, not loudly, not angrily, but clearly. "I survived you," she said into the darkness. and I won't be afraid anymore. Something shifted. Power drained from the men who had expected screams and submission. After a long, bitter silence, they turned away. When the last rider vanished into the night, Eleanor's knees nearly gave out, but Thomas was there, steady hands grounding her. The danger had passed, but something deeper had been settled. The past no longer ruled her. Time did what force never could. It healed gently, persistently. Eleanor's laughter grew freer, her steps lighter. She no longer startled at every loud sound, no longer searched faces for cruelty. The ranch was no longer just a refuge, it was home. And Thomas, who had once believed himself unworthy of softness, found it blooming around him despite every wall he'd built. They shared quiet moments, sunsets watched in silence, shared meals eaten slowly, hands brushing without urgency. Love did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived like dawn, certain, patient, undeniable. Thomas never assumed, never demanded, and perhaps that was why Eleanor chose him so completely. One evening, beneath a sky heavy with stars, Thomas finally spoke the question he'd been carrying like a fragile secret. "You came here out of necessity," he said carefully. "Not choice. If you want something else, someone else, I'll help you find it." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, seeing the man who had never claimed her pain as leverage, never treated her survival as debt. She stepped closer, placing her hand over his heart. "I choose you," she said, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she wanted to stay. His breath caught eyes dark with emotion he didn't try to hide. He nodded once, as if trusting himself to speak would shatter something sacred. Their wedding was small, honest, held beneath an open sky that had witnessed her breaking and her becoming. There was no grand audience, only land, wind, and vows spoken with quiet conviction. When Thomas promised, "I won't leave you," it wasn't rescue anymore. It was partnership. Eleanor promised back, not obedience, not silence, but truth and strength and presence. And when they stood together, hands clasped, it was clear to anyone who might one day hear their story, mercy had not weakened them. It had saved them. The woman once left bruised and forgotten was no longer defined by violence. And the cowboy who stepped in without knowing the cost found something greater than duty. He found love born not of need, but of choice.